Coming up on this week's RegCast.
The possibility of understanding the regulatory frameworks for all 200 plus jurisdictions in the world, it's practically impossible. And as a result, that broker can't practically give the investor access to those opportunities. But through a framework where you can actually encode and automate the enforcement, suddenly it makes it practical for investors to get access to new markets.
Compliance staff had to have a general understanding of all the algorithms in use. I think if you take a lot of compliance staff into a corner and talk to them very quietly about this, they'll say that they have a general understanding, but in terms of understanding what might actually go wrong, it's quite tricky.
For you to keep up individually with all of these changes and expect to stay within the rules are generally there for a good reason, is virtually impossible, especially at the pace of innovation in the blockchain space. You can automate pre-trade compliance in this, and that's revolutionary.
Interplay of algorithms that creates the problem. So unless you are interacting in a set of venues with a set of algorithms, anything else will not test your contribution to market disorder.
To the extent that you're able to automate aspects of this, you can significantly drive down cost and significantly increase deal flow.
Welcome to RegCast.
RegCast.
Where we shine a light on banking digitization.
Hi, welcome. I'm PJ DiGianmarino, CEO and founder of JWG, and I'm really pleased to have another RegCast focused on the capital market space. We've been shining spotlights throughout the year on the various issues within the markets, and what we wanted to come to today is what are some of these key themes mean for compliance itself. One of the big themes we've been pulling out of a lot of the discussion this year is that RegTech and SupTech can make or break businesses. I mean, this isn't just about efficiency. This is like, can you actually do the business? When you have a US person in Australia trading a cryptocurrency on through a German agent for a Singaporean product, some of the complexity here just breaks the way a bank would typically think about compliance. And in public markets, we're having more and more of these kind of obligations. They're deep and invasive, microstructural controls on top of best execution transparency and testing and data and cloud and third-party risk management. The list is endless, absolutely staggering. And I think that there's a real opportunity here with our two panelists today to really just dig in quickly to what some of that opportunity really looks like, because this is a vast rule set. With 2020 alone, JWG filtered 700,000 alerts. That's one per minute, looking at updates to this rule set that people need to be on top of. So increasingly, this isn't just about efficiency. It's about how do you actually know the business is safe. And we've long argued that a good part of that is having this core infrastructure for the regulation itself, that you need to tokenize the interpretation of the rules. You need to think about that in terms of the processing you're doing and be able to keep that interpretation live together with the actual business. So we're going to test a bit of that thinking today as we talk about digital compliance. I'm very pleased to introduce our two speakers. Dan, why don't you give people a quick intro?
Yeah, thanks, PJ. What a pleasure to be here, and what a great topic. We look forward to going deeper in the conference. So I'm Dan Doney, the CEO of Securrency. We are a blockchain-based financial service infrastructure company. And specifically, we focus on compliance and automation of compliance in the blockchain space. So the key questions, and the questions are perhaps more important than ever, is how do you enforce global securities regulations on a network that is inherently global for transactions that are peer-to-peer? And that requires automation, and that's what we're after today.
Thank you, Dan. Nick, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Sure, I'm Nick Idelson. I'm the technical director of TraderServe, and we provide systems primarily for testing for algorithmic testing for contribution to market disorder in particular, where we specialize in providing the entire ecosystem for a firm to test their algorithms, meeting the various global regulations, particularly in the EU under MiFID II, but also in the Far East and elsewhere.
Thank you. And a real pleasure to have both deep experts here today to share these perspectives. I guess we touched on this a bit in an earlier RegCast 10. We had a number of people speaking about the international trading landscape, which is changing yet again. Post Brexit, we have an EU review, we have a UK review, we also have an EU review. There's a separate set of rules for crypto called MiCA in Europe. So there's a lot in play right now. And I guess the first question I want to come to relates to what's the impact of rewiring while all those rules are being rewritten. I guess, Nick, how well did we do last time in terms of implementing some of these controls? I mean, with all the experience for MiFID II, and what are you seeing as important coming up for MiFID III and the rest of the global market change?
Well, we've just literally had ESMA publish very recently the MiFID II 5-year review for algo, and that's quite important. There are some changes coming up, but the implementation of the original MiFID II requirements has been a bit patchy in places. It took quite a long time. We are, say, 5 years in from MiFID II, but 4 years in from implementation because there was a year's delay. But even so, some of the things that have been implemented fairly well is the separation of the trading and risk and compliance controls. So we have first, second, and third line viewing of the various issues to do with algos. That tends to have happened, and the clear and formalized governance arrangement is a requirement, and any firm not doing that by now is very late and at some significant risk. The compliance staff had to have a general understanding of all the algorithms in use. I think if you take a lot of compliance staff into a corner and talk to them very quietly about this, they'll say that they have a general understanding, but in terms of understanding what might actually go wrong, it's quite tricky because systems are nonlinear, and you can get all sorts of very interesting effects happen as a number of public and less public disasters and minor disasters will testify to.
That's a really important point. I want to make sure we all understand that, which is MiFID II was written in response to some of the issues in the market with flash crashes, right?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
This whole notion of microstructural controls was meant to address that. But as you're pointing out, it's very hard to put a manual approach on a flash crash type of problem. How are you seeing firms trying to address this from a compliance perspective? Because that line 1, 2, 3 stuff doesn't necessarily wash with me.
Right. Well, it works reasonably in surveillance, though measuring contribution to market disorder is quite difficult. But in terms of the basic testing and the stress testing, where you're testing in higher volume and higher message rate conditions, that stuff all the firms tend to be doing. But yeah, it doesn't work so well when they're doing the testing beforehand. So you've got to test that your algorithms don't behave in an unintended manner and they don't contribute to disorderly trading conditions. And that contribution is a problem because a lot of people are doing scenario replays, but they're almost useless because obviously it's the interplay of algorithms that creates the problem. So unless you are interacting in a set of venues with a set of algorithms, anything else will not test your contribution to market disorder. And one of the big problems with this is that you're allowed to do this by writing your own test system, which really most firms are not doing, buying a vendor system, which some firms are doing and some firms aren't doing, or use a venue system. Unfortunately, while before MiFID II, when the onus for the testing was meant to be upon the venues were starting to do this. Now almost no venue does it at all because they don't need to do it anymore. They only need to offer a dummy instrument and maybe some scenario testing, but they don't need to offer a contribution to market disorder test. It's expensive and difficult to do for a venue. So, because they've got to offer isolated tests for every member, which is, well, if you put everybody together into one great big pot, you can't do a controlled test at all. So
it's a great example, right, of where traditionally regulators rely on central markets or clearing points, exchanges, MTFs, OTFs, try to sort this stuff out. But really, they can't take that responsibility. So it gets pushed off on back to market participants. And which makes it that much harder to actually know whether there is any control in place or not.
Yes, absolutely. This was a key change in MiFID II at the very last moment. When the final draft appeared, it suddenly said the onus on the testing is on the member firms and not on the venues. It was a last minute change. So that made a big, and they left part of the requirement written into RTS 7, which is the part of the regulation that applies to venues. So it's on the venues to put in their rules that the members must do this themselves, and then the members must follow the rules. So it's a sort of slightly, and so a lot of members didn't, this was one of the reasons nobody implemented this initially, because nobody'd read RTS 7. The member firms had only read RTS 6.
Well, another great example of how you can't even find the relevant text necessarily because you don't think it applies to you. So let's get Dan involved here. Dan, you come at this with the fresh set of eyes, and you're thinking about it, in a great new way. Explain to folks what really, is the prize here from digitizing compliance checks and then thinking about this in a more advanced technical fashion.
Yeah, well, the one thing that's unchanging is the fact that regulations will change. And so your evidence of 700,000 changes to track, it's simply, again, for participants in the blockchain world who have global reach, or at least expect global reach because the networks have global reach, for you to keep up individually with all of these changes and expect to stay within the rules are generally there for a good reason, is virtually impossible, especially at the pace of innovation in the blockchain space. So what's required, without a doubt, is a mechanism by which those rules really stand independent of the instruments they're connected to. An instrument based on where the jurisdiction that it's issued under, or the participants in a particular trade, should then consult the relevant rules. And again, it's possible to encode those rules and then consult with those rules in a peer-to-peer trade. So that is without having to go through an intermediary. Now, there are responsible parties on this. There are people who are accountable both for the rules, for properly classifying both a participant as well as the assets themselves. But once you do, you can automate pre-trade compliance in this. And that's revolutionary for several reasons. First, let's speak to investors. For the investor, what this means is you can actually onboard and qualify one time. And the attributes or qualifications associated with that investor can then be used across financial, of course, with the investor's permission, but across financial intermediaries, and certainly for peer-to-peer transactions. So instead of having to provide for each trade, let's say you're investing in a private fund, you've got to provide all of that evidence for that fund, and then for the next fund, and for the next fund. And when you open your PayPal account or your bank account, again, you're providing that same evidence. We see a world where investors provide it once, and where it's used as applicable more broadly. Additionally, because of this fact, and because of the global nature of blockchain, investors should, in an automated framework, get access to far more investment opportunity. So many investors are frankly cut off from emerging market opportunities. And so that prevents capital from flowing to those markets, and also from investors getting the opportunity to participate in the yield associated with those.
Let me just break that down again for the audience. So the first thing you focused on was great. I mean, that like taking away the pain of all the box checking and making sure I'm, why can't I just carry my digital token with, and that's sort of the net here. And then there's a second point, which is, well, because I can then be addressable because people can then find me, or because I can find more people that I can work with, there's a greater market opportunity, which is the democratization of finance.
Exactly, PJ. So to be specific here, for an individual market participant and their broker, the possibility of understanding the regulatory frameworks for all 200 plus jurisdictions in the world, it's practically impossible. And as a result, that broker can't practically give the investor access to those opportunities. But through a framework where you can actually encode and automate the enforcement, suddenly it makes it practical for investors to get access to new markets, which they wouldn't otherwise have had access to. And of course, that's better for both for the investors and for these emerging markets. And that really points to the next big beneficiary of these changes. That's the asset manager. The asset manager, of course, would like to attract capital to their opportunity. And one of the big challenges for asset managers or brokers is, in fact, the cost of compliance. And the fact that they have to do this each and every time. In fact, it's the major cost driver for financial institutions is compliance. And to the extent that you're able to automate aspects of this, you can significantly drive down cost and significantly increase deal flow. Well, that's great for everybody involved at the broker level. But perhaps the most biggest beneficiary of these changes is the regulator themselves. Because really, for the first time, they can have oversight, can inspect, and can even test the expectations about pre-trade compliance. And instead of having to dig into the back office of each and every broker to find out how they deal with various scenarios, you can actually test the regulations, the rule sets as they're encoded, and verify that they in fact meet your specifications. And because of these linkages, you can begin to trace the flow of value across many networks. It's very impossible when you have to, it's nearly impossible to trace the flow of value across all of the intermediaries when each intermediary sees a market participant differently. So recognizing that party A, that investor is the same entity in one or another broker is very impractical. In this system, it becomes much easier to trace and then oversee the financial markets. So we think all parties benefit.
In the framework, a lot of our participants at the conference will come at this from is the common domain model. In the deployment in the derivative space of a common language for the trade life cycle that can be used for participants to then understand and get more efficiency, but also then produce a regulatory report. And I guess part of the great new thing I think you're highlighting is, that by changing the way the business is done, you can automate that API to the regulator. The regulator can come directly and inspect, the bits of information they've asked for, because you can align, what information you've collected with what the regulators require from a transparency point of view.
That's right. And in a way that's analogous to Nick's great innovation here, they can actually test with a deterministic expectation of how the financial markets will behave under certain scenarios.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess just, coming back then to the bigger questions and themes that we're covering at the conference, Nick, based on what you've come in with and what you've heard from Dan today, what are some of the things you'll be focusing on at the conference, and what are you most looking to hear from the others, including the regulators?
Yeah, we're looking for really anything which impacts our clients and where we can help them by adding functionality to our product line. And one of the things I've found is that with really good conferences, the key things that we take out of them are not what we expected. So I try very hard to go to all the panels in these conferences. I didn't used to do that, but it's the ones that were the least, the most tangential, that often come up with something that we hadn't heard before that really makes a change and improves things for our clients. So that's certainly what I'll be doing. I won't be going in with any preconceptions. What you heard last year, you may hear that again, but it's the things that you didn't hear that are really important.
That's a great point. And I'll just take a second to say that the breadth of this conference is just staggering. I mean, we're covering everything from the core of what's happening in the markets to all of the various controls and oversights, and even thinking about how you control the control framework itself. So there's no doubt a whole bunch of great intersections. But Dan, for you, what's your key focus?
Yeah, I think Nick summarized it well. Look, the pace of change in the marketplace right now is happening faster than you can read. So it's almost every day you see something new that's coming out, both in terms of product and then the way that the market interacts with this product. I think everybody knows it's front and center, DeFi, and the implications of DeFi, DeFi being decentralized finance, and the mechanisms by which you can control or at least are affected by DeFi. We see a pathway that allows for regulation of DeFi. Some people think that to be an oxymoron. We actually think it's quite practical. So what we want to see is first I learn a lot from these type of sessions from the regulators, what they say, and also what they don't yet know. So in many cases, they simply aren't aware of capabilities that exist. And so sometimes if you listen to them, you get an opportunity to say, well, look, they just don't realize that this is possible. And but also you will discover, as Nick said, all sorts of things, especially in the places you didn't think to look, that are important for our business model and for the future of finance.
Well, I think that's an excellent place to draw a line under this particular conversation, but I will highlight you both are on different panels, so you can dial into them, but it will be live on the day. So we're going to be doing some polling and taking direct questions. And so I would encourage everybody to get their ticket, get online and participate. We will be sharing information, but it is regtechconference.co.uk, and we look forward to having you on and continuing this conversation next month. We're only 3 weeks away now, but we're looking forward to a robust production schedule, continuing through a whole bunch of more of these Regcasts. If you like what you hear, please follow us and like us and rate us. Or get in touch if you'd like to think about what we didn't cover and how we can cover it better. But it's been a pleasure to have Nick and Dan on. Thank you very much, and look forward to talking again soon.
You can go to our conference website, which is regtechconference.co.uk, or go to the JWG website, which is jwg-it.eu. This is RegCast,
where we shine a light on banking digitization.